Start recording. Okay. Welcome back to Sunday School. Happy New Year. And I hope you had a blessed and uneventful Christmas. Not everybody does. But hopefully it all went well. And you were able to keep the main thing, like I said on Christmas evening. And so Happy New Year. Great way to start out the year with my notifications still on my cell phone here. Come on, man. High quality professional stuff. I ordered a microphone. A separate actual microphone. It's $35 for it. Has all kinds of, it plugs in. It can plug into your cell phone and work with your cell phone.
Just don't get the snowball microphone.
It's not a snowball.
Those things are horrible.
Now this one I've actually seen. Somebody I know actually has this one and actually used it for something, and it does really good with sound quality. And one of the things I've noticed, even with the laptop here, is like kind of an echoey sound in this room, despite trying to hang stuff on the walls and absorb sound. But anyways, little inside baseball there. We're still going on with Timothy. And when we left out 2 weeks ago, we were talking about women's roles in the church. And so, so when you go back and look at that in chapter 2, because we are in 1 Timothy.
I don't have a Bible.
That was the great mystery, because Locals feed cut out. It's on Facebook and Rumble, but the Locals feed cut out. We figured out that I told William 2 Timothy instead of 1 Timothy. So we are in 1 Timothy chapter 3 now. You go back into chapter 2, all right, and he's telling, Paul is telling Timothy that men should be praying, right? That's how you connect with God. That's how you get right with God. That's how you talk to and how God talks to you is through prayer. And so, he said, 1 Timothy 2:8, I desire then that in every place men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling, right? So that leads him into talking about what women should be doing in the church in order to reestablish God's original design and the authority of men, and that women should not usurp the authority of men. So then once he goes through all that, as we get into chapter 3, now we find out what is the requirements for pastors and deacons. Now they use the word overseer in here. And the word overseer in the Greek is episkope. It's episcope, something like that. I looked it up earlier.
Better you than me, brother.
Yeah, well, go to Bible Hub, and Bible Hub will help you figure out how to say that in Greek. But anyways, that word means, that's what the word that they translate as overseer. And an overseer is someone who looks after others, who goes and visits or kind of supervises things. And that's the word that we, in turn, interpret as pastor. All right, so 1 Timothy 3, starting out in verse 1 through 4, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. Now, again, context here. It takes more than just reading this. You got to kind of do a little digging on this and go back and look at Um, one of the places the word. Well, before I get to that, real quick, the word episcopo or episcopi or episcope or whatever it is actually comes from the word episkeptami. Say that 10 times real fast. Okay. And that's a verb. So episcopi is a noun that describes a person, the overseer, right? Now the verb uh, episkepitomai is
Where does all those words come? Greek.
Greek. That's Greek. Yeah, that's definitely all Greek to me.
No doubt.
And so the all right, so Jesus uses that in Matthew chapter 25 when he is addressing the disciples, and he said, let's see here. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. So they were like, when Jesus says, whatever you do unto the least of these, you've done unto me. And so, in other words, looking out for people who can't look out for themselves, or people who are in a position, maybe they need food because they're hungry, maybe they need shelter, whether they're traveling or they're homeless, something, whatever you do, or they're in prison. And then where that, the where that word is used in that verse is the part where he says, I was sick and you visited me. Okay. Now, Luke also uses it in chapter 1, somewhere between verses 68 through 78, where he was talking about how God came and visited, right? Which Luke chapter 1 is getting into the genealogy and the birth of Christ. It's so the idea being God came in and checked on his people, i.e. the Jews, right? When you get into Acts, right, Acts chapter 6, where you see the actual implementation of the first deacons. And it says, in which they're trying to figure out there's an issue where the widows are constantly coming up to the disciples, coming up to the 12, and they're like, hey, look, we need this, we need that, we need this, we need that. And so finally they get together and they're like, look, we're having a tough time preaching because we're sitting here having to deal with these widows and take care of them. And it's not that they want to run them away or anything like that. They don't want to run them off. They want to actually care for them. And they want to actually make sure that their needs are met. So they say let's see here. Okay, so Acts chapter 6, verse 3. Therefore, brothers, select from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. All right, so the word episkopatobe, me, that word is used in Acts to talk about the role these 7 men are going to play in the early church to help take care of the widows. And so the whole point of the word that we translate as overseer is to care for people. It's not just to be in charge of stuff. It's a person who cares for others and does for others. So it's a servant position, and that's where that comes from. So if you're going to serve in the church, if you're going to aspire to any position in the church, you've got to be willing and able to care for other people. And not everything should be put on the pastor. I understand we say pastor. This is the qualification for a pastor, although technically this is not a pastoral position as in preaching from the pulpit. But that's part of that is in here where it says you're able to teach. And again, teaching is not exactly, but it can be synonymous with preaching. Hopefully, you've got a good preacher who teaches you things as they preach. But the whole idea here is a servant, right? And when we go through these different qualifications, the first one is to be above reproach, right? Verse 2. And so the word reproach is not something we use commonly in our vernacular today, the common verbiage or wordage that we use on day-to-day things. But if to have reproach is to express disapproval of, or to have criticism of, or to have disappointment in. And so if you are above reproach, that means that nobody is critical of you, nobody is disapproving of you or what you have done. Nobody's disappointed in what you're doing or how you're doing it, right? So a person who is above reproach is someone who's in, generally speaking, good standing with other people. All right, and this is the fun one because I realize there's a lot of divorced people out there. I mean, the divorce numbers within the church are the same as outside of the church, unfortunately. Let's see here. So the husband of one wife. Now, this is also the sticking point. All those people want to sit there and say, well, women can be preachers too. Women can be pastors. Women can be deacons, which the qualifications for deacon is from verse 8 through 13 in the same chapter. So that'll be next week when we get into deacons. But the husband of one wife. Now, we have to take into consideration that marriage vows are considered to be eternal. It's a marriage covenant. It is a I say eternal. It's not eternal. It's a lifelong commitment. There is no marriage in heaven, so it's not eternal. But here on earth, the whole time you're alive, if you get married the first time, you are married to that person till the day you die. Now, I understand there is reasons for divorce. It's unless it's an issue of life or death, you really need to do physical harm, mental harm, or actual life or death situation. You really need to do it unless it's one of those situations. You need to do everything you can to work out that first marriage and to keep it going and to fight for it. If you can't do that, well, then there is forgiveness, and not every marriage. Some people, and here's not everybody is willing or able to do that. Or perhaps you learn after the fact that you should have done it in the first place, and sometimes it's too late to fix everything. I get that, and I understand that. So does God. So there is forgiveness, but and depending on how strict your church is, if you got saved after your divorce and you've remarried, again, depends on how strict your church is. If you've gotten your life so right that you meet all the other qualifications to be an overseer or a deacon, then that's up to whatever your local church body is as to whether or not they're going to accept you in some sort of position like that. It doesn't mean you can't serve. It just, you got to figure that out. But most conservative churches will say if you've had a divorce at all, whether it was before or after you got saved, then that discounts you from being an overseer. There's still ministry opportunities. There's still ways to serve, just not in this specific capacity. But this also, because the word wife there is the word wife, it's not any other word. Even in the Greek, it's the word for wife. This discounts women from being overseers. Now, does that mean that a woman can't be a servant and can't go take care of other women in the church or children? No. But this is an office, this is an actual position in church leadership. And so to reestablish God's authority through the husband, then, you can't have a woman put in that position, because then the woman's going to be telling the men what to do. And that's what happened in the garden, and that's what screwed everything up, among other things. So we're also to be sober-minded. If we're going to be an overseer, we need to be sober-minded. And that's, again, something we don't normally say, but that means to be rational or sensible. And of course, to not be rash, to not make overly quick decisions, right? So to be a rational person means you think about things before you do them. So sober-minded, self-control. That's, got that plate of cookies sitting there, and it's like, I'm going back onto my intermittent fasting this week to get back in my diet back under control, to lose some of the weight I regained and lose some more. And so I have to have that self-control to not eat before 9 a.m. and to not eat after 7 p.m.
I do that all the time.
So, self-control. It's delayed gratification is a sign of maturity. We're to be respectable. So if you're above reproach and you're sober-minded and you're self-controlled, people around you generally are going to respect you. They're going to appreciate you. They're going to, they're not going to look at you and think bad things, and they might want your opinion. So if you're a respectable person, people are going to come to you for stuff. Maybe help, maybe ideas, advice, whatever, right? We're to be hospitable. Again, going back to the word overseer, which means to look after other people. That root word is to look after and care for other people. So if you're hospitable, it means and that's supposed to be one of the spiritual gifts, is the gift of hospitality, where you actually care for other people and kind of put their needs above your own. Maybe you invite them into your home. Maybe you let them use stuff. I don't know. There's different ways to be hospitable. Certainly inviting, especially if you're going to ask somebody to come to church and then you're like, hey, you're in my pew. I do that as a joke if I know the person. But I mean, there's times I've walked in and there's people I don't know sitting in the pew I normally sit in, and it's like, dude, okay. It's my spot. I like it. But I also understand that, they got there before me and my name's not on the pew.
There's 37 more.
The people whose names are on the pews have all passed away, because it all says in memory of, right? So they're not sitting in the pews. And here's a fun one. Able to teach. There's actually a lot of deacons out there who have never taught a Sunday school class, have never filled in for their pastor, have never, which there's a number of deacons that have done those things. But you have people that get into positions in church authority that have never taught a single class. And it's not necessarily teaching a class so much. That is part of it. But it's, if you're able to teach somebody, you got to be able to teach them the word. You've got to be able to share with them the gospel of Christ. And so you got to be able to teach people what that is. If you can't do that, then you don't have any business. Like I said, we say pastor for overseer, and we want a preacher who's going to actually get up and teach the Bible while they're preaching. A good eschatological preacher, an eschatological service where you actually learn something. It's not just a feel-good, rah-rah motivational speech like a lot of people put out there today. You want somebody who knows and understands the word and is able to actually articulate it to you in a form or fashion that you actually understand. Because if you're coming out of a service more confused than you went in, probably wasn't a good service.
Hence the reason why I started coming to this church. I'm just saying.
Yes, yeah, Brother Roy is a very good eschatological preacher, and you can learn a lot from his preaching. So,
Absolutely.
if you're out there looking for a church and you're watching this, come on by and visit. We'd love to have you here.
Wonderful.
You can even come to this Sunday school class in person, be live and in person. Let's see. Okay, so need to be able to teach people stuff, not be a drunkard. Now, as a Baptist, our covenant says, our membership covenant, church covenant says that we are to abstain from the use of alcohol, use and promotion, I believe it says. And so, I don't know what to do with all the people that work at Walmart or stores that sell alcohol. I'm not gonna go down that path. Um, but in general, we don't drink in the Baptist church. There are some where they do allow drinking as long as it's not at a church function. And of course, there's other denominations that they use actual wine during communion. Catholics do that, Lutherans and some other folks that have actual communion services more frequently, they might use actual wine. So the Bible doesn't specifically say don't drink. It just says do not be drunk. Matter of fact, Paul actually advises Timothy to drink some wine for his stomach. That's in here. That's one of the things in here that he gets into later on towards the end of the letter. Okay, so, but if you're drunk all the time, you're not in control of yourself. There's a reason they call them spirits, alcohol and spirits, because they for a long time viewed it as an open window for an evil spirit of some type to enter into your body because you're not in control of it. So if you're drunk off of wine, you're going to be out doing stupid stuff potentially. And if you're a drunkard, you're not going to meet any of these other requirements. Not be violent, but be gentle. There's nothing wrong with defending yourself when it's appropriate. But not every situation calls for violence. And you have to have the wisdom and the ability to know the difference and know the timing so that you can say, now's the time for me to kick somebody's rear end, or now's the time for me to let them just make a fool of themselves and just defend myself if necessary, and then move on. Not quarrelsome. If you're quarrelsome, you're the type that wants to sit there and argue all the time and start fights. They could potentially lead to physicality. So and I know people like that who just love to argue. And it's like, why? There's no disagreement, but just for the fun of it, they start one. I don't get that. I'm not like that at all. Now, if you're saying something stupid and it does, yeah, I've never seen the point either. I've known people like that, and sometimes, there's playing devil's advocate, which is one thing, but to just start an argument simply for the sake of starting an argument, that's not what you want to do. That's a quarrelsome person. You're not sober-minded if you're doing that. And then it says you're not a lover of money. So it's easier to pass a camel through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. If you're chasing after money, you're not chasing after Jesus. That's very simple. It's not to say you can't be rich or a wealthy Christian, but if you spend all your time chasing after money, you're not spending any of your time chasing after Jesus. And so if you are a lover of money, you are not a lover of God. Yes, I know money is necessary to, survive and exist in our world today. But, do what you got to do and be content with what you have. Doesn't mean you can't get a nicer house if you got a crappy one and you worked hard and you want a nicer one and you work hard to get it. That's great. But again, if you want a nice car because your car is crappy and you need a newer car, that's okay too. I'm not saying you can't have nice things. Just simply saying what the Bible says here is not be a lover of money. It's not everything is wrapped up in keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. So, and then managing your own household and having submissive children. In other words, you have disciplined your children and you have taught them to be obedient by and large. And there is a point at which that does stop. And once they become adults and accountable for themselves, you know, you're basically done. You're not done raising them, but they're on their own. And so if they go and do something stupid when they move out of your house, that's on them, not on you. All right. So we're running out of time here with locals. We've got less than 5 minutes. All right. So go down to verse 5 through 7. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. So if you're beyond reproach, it's if you're well looked at within the church, but the people outside the church don't like you, something's wrong. Something's not right somewhere. Now, it could be you live in a community full of devil worshippers, or it could be that you're just this massive hypocrite that puts on a good show at church and you're a jerk out in town. There's plenty of people like that. Not an excuse to not come to church, but it is what it is. So that's, when you're looking at an overseer, when you're looking at someone who might be your potential pastor or worship leader or a Sunday school teacher or some position of accountability and authority, if you know that they're jerks out in town, but they're just really super sweet and nice in church, then that's a person you really need to think twice about to put in a position like that, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? At some point, the charade will fail and they'll be exposed for who and what they are. And then you're going to cause all kinds of problems. People are going to be upset, and it just causes strife within the church, and you don't need that. So, which I want to go back to this. He must not be a recent convert. And we see this, especially with celebrities. Who's the guy from 2.5 Men? The kid in the show 2.5 Men that got saved. And he did kind of a Kirk Cameron thing where he just kind of flipped out, and he was under contract and some other stuff, and he had some issues.
His first name was Jared?
I don't remember what his name was, but certainly the most recent, most famous one that's having a lot of issues is Kanye West. I do believe he got saved, but because of all the stress and where he was coming at, the situation he was coming out of, the devil's going to attack him greater than anybody else because he lost one of his greatest mouthpieces. Well, now he's fallen in with the Hebrew roots people, and he's saying some really unfortunate things that are incorrect. So he's been wrongly discipled by a group of people that took him in and weren't giving him grief, but he's too immature as a Christian to know different and to know better than to fool those people. And so, you have, that's part of the problem with putting a new convert in a position of accountability or a position of authority and expecting them to handle it well. You don't want to have someone who just got saved put in a position as a Sunday school teacher. You don't want to have them preach. It doesn't mean you can't have them share their testimony and say, this is what God has done for me. But, day to day, Sunday to Sunday, Wednesday to Wednesday, this is a person who needs discipleship and needs training to make sure they properly understand the Word of God, the gospel of Christ. And then you got to make sure they meet these other requirements we've already listed off. And so that's why majority of churches out there will put a 1-year requirement new members before they can serve. So run out of time on locals. Happy New Year. God bless. This is Murph reminding you to go make disciples, and see you next week, which means I'm going to finish up on Facebook as well. Keep on reading through 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we'll see you next time.